What's up, YouTube? It's Sonny Daniels once again. Today, we are having a topic which says what to expect as an African first time coming to Europe. It's an interesting topic, but first of all, if you find this channel very interesting, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your thoughts or experience down the comment section below. Let's get right into the topic of today.
So today we're doing this interview
Yeah.
as you asked me to come and ask you some questions. So what was your first impression when you actually came to Europe? Like your first thoughts? Because as far as I know, you specifically live in Barcelona, right?
Yeah, I do live in Barcelona, Spain. Um, I've been living here for the past 2 years.
What, or maybe let's start. What made you come to Spain? What made you come to Europe? What was your intentions? What was the reason why you left Africa and came to Europe?
Good question. What made me come to Europe? First of all, I was living in Cape Verde. It's an island in West Africa. It's a beautiful island which I want many people to visit as well. So write it in your diary or somewhere in your house just to visit. It's a very beautiful place. Why I came to Europe? While living in Cape Verde, we live through tourism. It's an island where there's a lot of beautiful things to see. So we don't have anything more than the tourism which we gain from. So after the pandemic, things stopped. We had to move. Many people were suffering, and yeah, that was the number one reason I had to leave Cape Verde down to Barcelona, down to Europe.
Okay, so from my understanding, you left for economic reasons, for money reasons.
Perfectly short words, economic reasons. Yeah,
Okay, so when you came to Barcelona, then because that was your first stop in Europe, right?
yeah.
What was your first impression when actually leaving the airplane and seeing the city?
When I arrived here in Barcelona, the city is beautiful. First of all, if you come, for example, to Barcelona, you might get lost because every building looks the same. There are huge buildings which I wasn't used to. In Cape Verde, we have little buildings, short buildings. What you see is the sea, and maybe the highest building you're going to see is like a two-story or three-story building. But in Barcelona, in Europe, you have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-story buildings. It's beautiful. You might get confused at the first time, but it's beautiful. It's a place where you're gonna like with time.
So that was your very first impression, the buildings. What was your first impression of the people when you left the airport and you actually came into the city? Did it seem very similar to you, to the people in Cape Verde? Did they make a different impression to you, like your first impression of the people?
It was different in many sense, but on my own view, I'm gonna say it's a very social city. First and foremost, it's a very social city. Nobody give a fuck. They don't care. Like you just have to be yourself. Secondly, I would say in Cape Verde, where I came from, most part of Africa where I came from, when you walk past somebody, you have to say hello. But here, they don't give a fuck about you. They don't talk to you. They don't even say hello.
Mm.
You walk past them as they walk past you. And yeah, it's in a short form, I would say it's a city where you are just on your own. You just come and just do your thing.
Right. Okay, perfect. Then let me come to the differences in travel because obviously you had to get to Europe in some way. Um, did you use the airplane? Which way did you actually get to Europe?
I actually use the airplane. That was the only format for me to come here.
Mm.
I don't use the boat, but I also feel for those people who use the boat, who uses boats or other means to come to Europe. But for my own part, I use the airplane.
Well, you didn't need to come through boat because obviously you had papers to actually come
Exactly.
to
I had my papers and I had my my thoughts and reasons, and I already had
Europe.
my view and experience before coming here. I already read about it, so I was all prepared, planned to come here.
Right. Okay. Then just a question about that. So when you're traveling through Africa, because obviously Africa is a big continent, a lot of different countries,
Mm.
did you actually travel to other places in Africa before?
Yeah, I've been to 7 different countries in Africa.
Mm,
I've been to Sierra Leone, I've been to Nigeria, I've been to Congo, I've been to Gambia, Zambia, and Ethiopia.
right. And was there any difference in traveling? Like, if you would compare it to traveling in Europe, was there any differences in traveling in Africa? If it comes to airplanes, buses, is there something where you would specifically say it was different to the way they travel in Europe?
Yes, it could be the same, but on my own experience, most of the parts I traveled in Africa was through road, bus. For me, I wanted to travel to for just for experience, and the best part to get experience in traveling by Africa is through the road. You will see a lot of things, a lot of fun, a lot of bad, a lot of good, and a lot of crazy things. But in Europe, um, many things, most of the things you do from while traveling is through the airplane or used by. You could also use the train, which there are some parts of Europe which are very close to each other, while some part of Africa is really far. By the road from Africa to Africa, from a different country in Africa to another part of African country, might last you days. In Europe might just last you hours. So, and also another thing you should know, in Africa when you use transport like by bus, you don't need papers to get into a country. But in Europe, you need your documents ready, your papers ready, and every legal document have to be intact before traveling to the other country.
Right. Um, you just mentioned that you like to travel by bus. Would you say that financially, like economically seen, obviously you have a different type of earning in African countries than you usually do in European countries. Depending on that, would you say traveling within African countries is more affordable or more expensive or more or less the same as in Europe?
I would say it's a 50-50. There are some parts of Africa which is very cheap. There are some parts of Africa which is expensive. But another thing I also want you to know is this. You could also pay a transport from one part of a country to Africa to 3 different parts of country to Africa as well, if you understand what I mean. What I try to say is this. For example, if you're traveling from Sierra Leone to maybe Mali, which I know you have to pass through Cameroon and different kind of country, African countries, I mean the border, it's a one-way price. In Europe, it's different. It's really different. If you are going to a specific place, you have to pay the price to that place. And you also have to get ready, planned to go to that place.
Mm.
For my own experience, it wasn't planned. I was just on a road trip, visiting different places. It was like I just pay and pay and pay. And the amount I paid is more cheaper than the amount you pay here in Europe. So for you to travel from a European country to another European country, you need to have some money.
Right, but obviously here in Europe we also have very cheap airlines like EasyJet, Ryanair, where you sometimes can get even tickets for like €10. Do you have these type of things? Yeah, in different African countries too. Like, what I mean is, if you compare the African income, obviously there's not one African income because it's a lot of different countries with different financial situations. But from your own point of view, from where you are, and when you were traveling with that budget that you got from that country that you were living in and working in, would you say compared to what you earned and what you spent on traveling, it was more affordable or more expensive over there
In
than in Europe?
Africa, in Africa, the price of traveling you have to discuss it with the driver. With the driver, what I mean is this: in Europe, you could also get the price of where you're traveling to online, meaning you already have a price online, already price set. While in Africa, you could discuss the price right there with the driver.
Right, that is very much a difference. Okay, so we have that part. Let's maybe get into the point of public transport because obviously you said you're living in Barcelona. Would you say there's a difference in public transport when we're not talking about traveling abroad or anything like that, but actually traveling within the city or in general, what you've experienced in the European countries you have been to, what are the differences in public transport? Are there any differences?
There are differences actually. Public transport, first of all, in Europe is more organized. You have this ticket you have to buy online, or you have this ticket where you buy in the train station. Um, and you also have time frame where the bus have to come. You know, the difference between that in Africa and that in Europe is this. In Africa, you could also enter the bus without paying. Sometimes you see people entering the bus by just squeezing themselves in. You don't squeeze yourself in Africa, in Europe. In Europe, you need to have the ticket to get into a bus, or else you won't get into a bus. And like I said before, there's a time frame where the bus come. You could also search the time in your phone when the bus is going to arrive, which we don't actually have in Africa. There are some places that might have this kind of thing when it comes to transportation, but most part of Africa you don't have specific time frame. You just have to be there when the bus arrive. Yeah, when the bus doesn't arrive, you just have to wait. And also, it's like people squeeze themselves into the bus. Sometimes people hang around in the bus, like behind the bus. Like people just find the means of transportation like anyhow. It's like an anyhow kind of thing, not planned. But in Europe, it's well organized. Either the train or by bus. You just need a ticket, which you have to pay for. It could be a day trip ticket, it could be monthly ticket, it could be 3 months. You just have to be prepared, and it's more organized than in Africa.
Right. Okay, that is very interesting. Maybe let's get into working in Europe. What are the labor rights and work ethics? What might be the difference over there? Do you think that there are stricter or less strict labor laws over here? What is the difference? And if you're working in Europe, specific, I mean specifically in Spain, and when working in Africa, would you say it's the same law when working, same freedom in things that you're doing? What is the work like, especially as an African coming to Spain? Would you say there's a lot of like job offers? How does it work? What is your impression on that one?
First of all, I would say the legal law here in Europe, they are more strict when it comes to work. You need to have your papers, most especially where I stay in Barcelona. If you don't have papers, you definitely, there's 99% chance of you having a job in Barcelona, in Spain. As a black person, as an African, that is what you should need to know. For you coming to Europe, you need to have your papers ready to get a job, or else there might be little or no chance for you to get a job. When it comes to the law and the way to get a job there, they are more strict than in Africa. In Africa, you might get a job without papers. There are a lot of European friends I know who work in Africa at a place without even needing a paper. So when it comes to legalization, when it comes to paperwork to get a job, it's more strict here in Europe than in Africa. When it comes to labor, a labor you are more professional when it comes to here in Europe. You're also professional in Africa as well, but you labor more in Africa than laboring more in Europe. We labor here in Europe also as well, but we labor with time. There's a certain time where you need to be very focused with your work, and there's a certain time where you don't need much more effort because, for example, in Africa, there's some 90% of the job in Africa is physically engaging than in Europe. In Europe, they are more strictly with your mindset and many things. So when you come to Europe, when you want to work in Europe, somewhere in Europe or any places here in Europe, you need to be well prepared and well organized than in Africa.
Right. So how does it work in Africa? Because here in Europe, obviously, they are very strict with their time. I mean, yes, in Spain, they're a little bit less strict, where if you're coming 5 minutes late, you won't be fired. Very different from Germany, because in Germany, they're very strict with their time, where they say 5 minutes before the time is the right time. But how does it work in Spain and how in Africa? Do they accept people coming late? Are you expected to stay longer than your job actually intends? How is it with work times?
Yes, time is super important here in Europe. Time is very important. That is one thing you need to know when coming to Europe. In Africa, you might come 5 minutes late without even informing your boss, and just explain to your boss, hey, this is what made me come late. You could also do that in Europe, but most of the jobs in Europe, If you're coming late, you need to let them know earlier. What I mean is this: for you to work in Europe, it depends on the kind of job. They also have this kind of thing where you come late, but you need to let them know earlier. The time is super important. When you work anywhere in Europe, you have to be on time, or more or less 10 minutes before your actual work time. And when by the time leaving, by your closing hour, sometimes you might stay longer. It depends on you, but most time you leave at your exact time. While in Africa, you might even close 1 hour after your time. So the time frame in Europe and Africa is quite different. They are very strict with the time. In Europe, then the time can be little lesser strict in Africa.
Obviously, you're talking about your experience of working right now. Would you like to share in what type of field you're currently working in?
For me, because I'm a kind of introvert kind of person when it comes to sharing my personal things, I work in tourism,
Hmm. All right,
which has to do with people
right,
and which needs strict time and strict laws for you to be able to work there.
very true. All right. If you would have to talk about salaries,
Hmm.
because I think that might be something that a lot of people are interested in.
Hmm.
Salaries in Spain, what do you think would be like an average salary in Barcelona for a typical person coming from Africa to Barcelona? What can they expect? And compared to what are they earning, how expensive is life in Barcelona?
The salary in Barcelona, which I want you people to know, the minimum salary it is like 1,200 euros, the average salary, or let me say 1,000 euros.
May I ask, is that before or after tax?
Some might be before tax. It depends on what kind of they are part-time job and their full-time job.
Hmm.
So the full-time job, the average salary you will get is like 1,000, 1,200 euros after tax, compared to the money you get in Africa, which you know euros have a huge margin compared to the money in Africa. So it depends. It depends. Like I said, the salary depends on the work you do.
Hmm. Okay, so that is the salary. Knowing the salary right now, the salary that people can expect, what will you say? How expensive is life? Can you easily like live without money that you get, or is it more difficult? Is life in Spain or in Europe in general cheap? What do you think?
Life in Spain is very expensive. I'm going to be honest with you. For you to come to Spain as an African, you need to be able to manage yourself very well to live fine. You could have two jobs, which most people do, to be able to survive. But what is going to eat your money most time in Europe might be the house rent, the light, the water, which is quite different from what we pay in Africa. For example, we don't pay the rent yearly as they do most parts of Africa. We pay the rent monthly by monthly, which are the most significant bills you have to pay here in Europe.
Mm,
So life in Europe, the food, the also other things you might need are expensive more here in Spain than
okay,
most parts of Europe. There are other parts of Europe which are more expensive than in Spain, but for you to know before coming here, life is expensive. Where I am in Barcelona, it is expensive.
right. You just mentioned that part of the big expenses would be rent. If we talk about rent, what do you think can people that come to Barcelona specifically, because obviously that's where you're living, rent might be different at other places, but I feel like Barcelona is also a place that a lot of people like to go. What do you think rent looks like in Barcelona for a room or for an apartment? What can people expect?
Yes, it depends on the place you are. In Barcelona, first of all, you could rent a room minimum 300 euros. You could also get a room 200 euros that is outside of Barcelona. Maybe the outside the outside villages in Barcelona. You could get a cheaper room. But when you want to live inside Barcelona, the minimum you could get is 400, 350.
Does that already include the bills or does it not include the bills yet?
It doesn't include the bills. The bills comes differently,
Okay, so on top of that, you're gonna pay water,
separately.
would that be a nice room or a small room? Like if we're talking about, let's say, 350 euro, as you said, if you're living inside the city center, is that something you can easily find? And would that be a nice room, or what would a room of 350 euro in Barcelona look
It
like?
depends on what you choose, what you want. For example, before you enter a room, they have to take you to see the room first of all to see if you like it or not. Definitely, there are bad rooms, but for the amount you pay, it is what you will get. You get a good room for the good amount of money you pay. For example, if you pay 500 euros for a room, you definitely have a good room. But if you're paying 350 inside Barcelona, there's 60 to 65% chance that the room might not be really good like that.
And probably small as well, right?
Smaller, yeah.
Right. Okay, so that is about that prices on housing. When we're coming to supermarkets, what do you think about the supermarkets in Europe? Do you see any differences in like grocery shopping? What are the differences to Africa, and how is it in Africa?
Yeah, there are some differences. It depends. The only place where I don't see difference is in the supermarket, because in the supermarket, this is the only way to buy things in Europe. Supermarket. Yes, if you want to go, for example, in a supermarket in Africa, you could also do the same here in Europe, because the only difference I will only say here is there are lots of places where you could buy things by hand in Africa. For example, there are street shopping where people don't have a covering like a normal shop. People sell things on the street, and most people in Africa likes buying things on the street than in the supermarket. So that's the little bit difference. In Europe here, most things, the grocery and everything, you just buy them in the supermarket, which we also do have in Africa. But the difference is they sell more street things in Africa than in Europe.
So would you say in a lot of African countries they prefer using the market over a supermarket?
Yes,
Because
yes.
we do have markets in Europe as well, but I wouldn't say that the majority is shopping on markets. There are some people that go to markets, but a lot of people are choosing the supermarket. What do you think?
That is the difference. You just said it right there. In Africa, we do more like to go to a market where it's open than in the supermarket. That is why you see there are not much supermarkets in most parts of Africa, because we do like open things where you could buy cheap, where you could price something. In supermarket, you don't price. The price is already there. While here in Europe, we mostly do it supermarket because that's where people do go. There are very few markets where you could price. I don't know if there is somewhere where you could price things in Europe, because I don't think there is. I have not seen,
There
but
is.
in Africa, they mostly like buying things where they could also price. They could also interact or make conversation on the price tag of something you want than in Europe. Europe have a fixed price. Anywhere, anything you want to buy, it is fixed.
That's very true. I mean, it comes again to each country in Europe, because especially Spain, Italy, Greece, like the southern European countries, and Portugal as well, they do have markets, and people in these countries more frequently visit markets than the northern European countries. However, usually it's not a daily market, it's more like a once per week market where
Mm,
people get their vegetables and
mm.
their fruit. There you can also haggle, meaning you can find out what the prices are and then trying to lower the price. Um, I obviously haven't been to Africa, so I don't know how it works there, but I would assume from what I've seen on videos and on what you've told me that it is very different. Because yes, you can haggle, but it's definitely not that much cheaper.
Sorry to interrupt you. There are still some places, don't get me wrong, there are still some places where you could buy things right pricing.
Mm,
But there are little chance for you to buy something
very
there.
true.
And people don't go to those kind of places because they believe, here in Europe, they believe those kind of things are not really good to buy. Most people think the best place to buy things is in the supermarket.
That's true. They think
Yeah,
it's higher quality,
yeah.
very, very much. All right. So when it comes to the food, so you came to Europe. You obviously are living here now for a while. You've tasted different types of food. What do you think about the food in Europe? Is it any different to the one in Africa? What?
Well, me as an African, I love my African food, and there are good foods in Europe, and there are also good food in Africa. For me, if I could choose what I would like to eat, because I was born in Africa, obviously I would choose my African food.
Mm,
But people don't like to cook in Europe here. People like to go to restaurants to eat and something like that, where you could also have the chance to taste different kind of cultures, their food and something like that. But we Africans, we like to cook. So the food for me, I like more the African foods than the European foods, because there's a difference. There's a difference when there's things I like. For example, I like my food more spicy,
mm,
but in Europe, 95% don't like spicy food.
that
So,
is very true.
and we African mostly we can eat whatever we see. Like we can make food ourselves and put it in our own way of taste, which other people too might also enjoy. But in Europe, once they cook, once you have a menu, a food, they want it to be as it is in the paper.
That is also very
And they
true.
give you, for example, when you go to a restaurant, European restaurant here, which are different kind of culture, they will put salt, pepper, and everything in front of your food if you want to add it. While in Africa, you don't have that. The salt is already there. The pepper is already there. The the ingredients are already in the food. So what you just have to do is just eat, and that's all. And drink water. Yeah.
100% agreed on that one. So you would say people here definitely like to eat out more than.
More. People like
Mm.
to eat outside. Yeah, people like more. They don't like, I don't know. Most of the people I know here, they don't like to cook.
Would you think that has to do with their lifestyles, like busy lifestyle, or do you think it's just a thing of that they just don't like cooking? What is your own opinion on that one?
I would say most people I know just don't like cooking entirely. Me, I love cooking.
Mm,
I love cooking. That's one of my hobby. But people here just don't like cooking. Other people might also have their own thoughts, of not cooking at home. Maybe due to work frame, or maybe they are tired or something like that. But 70 to 80% don't like cooking in Europe.
right. Okay. And let's get to the point of like maybe crime and legislation.
Hmm.
Would you say where you're living currently, there's a lot of crime? How do they handle the crime if there is any? And what is it like in Africa, at the places that you've lived and that you've seen?
First of all, in crime in Europe, where I live in Barcelona, there are little or more, no crime in Europe. There are very few crime that happens in Europe, in Barcelona most especially. For example, what you when you go online or what you see in Barcelona, which is actually true, is pickpockets. They don't steal from you aggressively. Very few steal from you aggressively. They steal more intelligently when you are careless with your things, and yeah, and you don't see anyone with arms or gun or anything like that. You don't see things like that. And here in Europe, most especially Barcelona, where I live, if you fight, you pay fine. If you punch somebody, you pay fine. So if you're kind of this aggressive kind of person who likes to fight, who think, oh, nothing is going to happen, you will pay a lot of fine. Maybe you end up being poor at the end of the day. What you just have to do when you come to Europe is being calm, cool. Don't get into fights. Don't get into quarrel. Avoid quarrel as much as you can, because you might not get favored as a black person. You might not get favored as a black person. So when you're coming to Europe, there are not much crime. If you fight, if you engage in any fight, you have to pay a lot of fine, and that fine is going to be very, very expensive. While in Africa, you could fight and they can just put a whole ring for you people to just fight and fight till you get tired. And the crime here, in Africa, they can be very aggressive. You might also lose your life while trying to protect yourself from being getting robbed. So, and the security in Africa are not that strong as it is in Europe.
So would you say if there is anything happening in Europe, they would rather call the police or they would do something themselves?
100% they will call the police.
Mm,
If there are people there who feel endangered, by what is going on, they will definitely call the police. And the police will be there in less than 5 minutes. There will be a lot of security. So the security in Europe is very strong. While in Africa, which many people might not even call the police, if they actually call the police, you might be long dead before they arrive. So you have to be very careful when you're in Europe than in Africa. And in Africa, I don't know if you know, there's something they call jungle justice, where people, for example, you go somewhere and you steal, and people start shouting this thief in different language in Africa. If the police don't arrive early, that that person might get killed before the police get arrive. While here in Europe, there is no jungle justice. So if you have the mind of beating a thief, you will pay fine.
That
So
is
be
very
careful.
true.
First of all, don't make quarrel, don't get into aggressive interaction or get into fight. Focus on what brought you to Europe and make sure that your documents have no crimes on it. It will help you.
Right. So let's maybe get into the topic of faith and religion. How did
Hmm.
you experience that over here, and how did you experience it in Africa?
Europe is not a place to where religion works. Fuck, nobody cares about religion in Europe. The only religion in Europe is party. You party, you walk, you live life. Nobody cares. Having fun. Europe is people just want to have fun. If you come here thinking of religion, you're wasting your time. In Africa, people are super religious. Super religious. That doesn't mean that in Europe you don't go to church, they don't have church or mosque or what kind of religion. If you're this kind of super religious person, I think Europe is not a place for you if you want to come. So when you come to Europe, what the mindset you should have is work, fun, party, live your life.
Hmm. Okay, and